expert machines in regions 1, 9, 10, and 6. And this month, region 7 and 8 will have. Currently, we have the capacity to do up to 2,000 COVID tests. There are antigen test kits in every single region. Mr. Speaker, and I'll explain, and I'll leave that minister to the I'll say, you never used to do tests. People died and their diagnoses were never put. They died with symptoms of COVID, and we know that. We know that because testing in Guyana,
Dr. Mahadeo, that you is to me.
Sorry, Mr. Speaker. Honorable member, we know when COVID came to Guyana, after months, how many tests were being done per day? How many were done in months? 20 or just over 20. Persons were dying with symptoms when doctors request for COVID sample tests to be done. No, just bury them. How could we say that we had the real figures? Mr. Speaker, to get a COVID test done, we had a minister, she wasn't a doctor, she wasn't a nurse, she wasn't a technician, she wasn't a community health worker, but she had to agree. She had to agree for a COVID test to be done on a patient, and she held the results, and those results were not made available to the doctors who are managing these patients until she decided. Mr. Speaker, the honorable member said, held up those documents that they did with nice fancy slogans and headlines. Mr. Speaker, what I want to say is whilst they had nice words there, the populace was being stabbed in the back by all the new taxes and all the increases and the increase in cost of living in this country. This is why, Mr. Speaker, they're over there and we're over here. The SOP said so, and the recount also said so, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I remember, I think it was in 2015, then we had an honorable minister, George Norton, and he referred to the honorable member as the brown girl in the ring, tra-la-la-la-la. Today I know, Mr. Speaker, that we also have some men with green and pink slips in the ring. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to move on to my speech. And I take this opportunity to first congratulate Honorable Minister Ashley Singh on a job well done. Thank his staff for the long hours they put in to achieve this feat. It speaks to great teamwork, Mr. Speaker. Of course, the guiding hand of His Excellency the President and the Vice President must also be acknowledged. Mr. Speaker, in 1992, and I take you back to 1992, we inherited a broken, destroyed, and shattered country. A country where majority of its citizens had lost hope and were barely surviving from day to day. Every sector was in a state of disarray. I was working at the New Amsterdam Hospital at that time. I remember the days of severe shortages of drugs and medical supplies, inadequate laboratory facilities, non-existent diagnostic equipment. The PBPC worked tirelessly from 1992, painstakingly reducing the huge debt burden that the PNC had put on Guyana, elevating the standard of living day by day, year by year, raising wages and salaries, laying a solid foundation, and building the health system brick by brick, like a house, board by board. My personal experience, Mr. Speaker, in Region 6, of not being able to access basic laboratory tests, not even a random blood sugar test at the regional hospital in New Amsterdam in 1992. By 2014, one could have gotten those tests at health centers. In 1992, at the outpatients and accidents and emergency at the New Amsterdam Hospital, there was a dispenser working, seeing patients. By 2014, doctors were working even at health centers. And in Region 6 at Oriala, Sipruta, there were 2 doctors stationed there. Mr. Speaker, by 2014 in Region 6, we had Guyanese trained specialists at hospitals. We were no longer totally dependent on foreign nationals to provide specialist services. The bedridden and elderly were provided care at their homes through the extended home-based care service. Not only did the doctors, dentists, and rehab staff visit the patients at home, but they got their medicines, other supplies like walkers, urinals, bedpans, pampers, etc., to the homes of these patients. There were elderly care clinics at all facilities and special geriatric mega clinics across the region. Communities had a voice in the management of their health facilities through management committees, and they got feedback from the facilities through community health facility days. Then, Mr. Speaker, then came tsunami, AFC, APNU in the first half of 2015, destroying everything in sight, destroying not only industries, but also destroying the healthcare system built so painstakingly by the PAPC. This was not only in Region 6, but across the country. We inherited a broken system in 2020. Most of the gains made before 2014 were dashed, destroyed, shattered. Even equipment that were donated were left sitting, whilst the people, the citizens, had to pay. Typical example, the CT scan that was requested for since 2014, received in 2015. And do you know when it started working, Mr. Speaker? October 2020. Most of the other medical equipment were down, including x-rays, laboratory equipment, data equipment. Not working due to no maintenance, no servicing. Mr. Speaker, there were poor procurement practices, and I say this without fear of contradiction, because there is proof. I do not know if it is plain incompetence or corruption. I do not know whether it is a case of spending the monies in such a way that some particular suppliers can get the contracts. I do not know what practices or what rules are being followed, Mr. Speaker. I do not know why the technical staff were not consulted. Mr. Speaker, unto this day, I still cannot understand how a veterinary anesthetic machine was bought in Region 6 to use on humans. And here is more proof. Here is more proof of gross incompetence or complete mismanagement, Mr. Speaker. The Rehabilitation Department of the Ministry of Health, this time centrally, in around 2017, requested a piece of equipment to assist with persons having lung problems, Mr. Speaker. That piece of equipment can be used for persons who are in bed, like stroke patients, patients who got head injuries, and who are having problems with their lungs. The request was made, medically correct name for a medicinal chest vibrator, a vibrating machine equipment that is placed flat on the chest of the patient to stimulate the lungs. Then, the then Ministry of Public Health bought, Mr. Speaker, bought this, a vibrating dildo for the department to use. This is what the Ministry of Public Health bought for the staff to use on the patients having chest issues. Mr. Speaker, can you imagine the consternation of the rehab staff? Until today, when they speak of it, you could hear the disgust in their voices. Mr. Speaker, how can this be explained? Incompetence, ignorance, corruption, or all three? Mr. Speaker, if we had that piece of equipment, it could have been used on the COVID patients. But you know what? Since last year, the staff were again trying to get the equipment, but it's not available. It's all sold out because of the COVID. Mr. Speaker, this is typical and classic as to how the health system was managed in Guyana by the APNO AFC prior to August 2020. Mr. Speaker, the foundation Mr. Speaker, again I ask, was it corruption or mismanagement? The foundation laid by the PPC pre-2015, Mr. Speaker, was strong. And we are building again. Like the legendary phoenix, Guyana is rising again. Services are being offered again, and in a short time, it is being taken to heights never achieved before. National Ophthalmology Hospital. For 5 years, the National Ophthalmology Hospital is allowed to deteriorate. Not only were medical equipment not working, the building was leaking. ACs were not functioning. Staff were demotivated. No consumables, no drugs and medical supplies. The once national pride of Guyana, Mr. Speaker, became a national disgrace under the APNO AFC. Mr. Speaker, in 2014, there was no backlog of cataract cases in Guyana. However, to date, we have already identified over 1,200 cataract cases. Mr. Speaker, this is an indictment of the APNO AFC government. No wonder it is common to hear the words, "Never again APNO AFC." Mr. Speaker, 2 weeks ago, after major works and repairs to the building and equipment, the National Ophthalmology Hospital started doing surgeries once again. 16 cataract surgeries and a number of pterygium surgeries were done. This will continue. There is hope for the cataract patients once again in Guyana, Mr. Speaker. Nearly $100 million is budgeted this year to make this facility fully functional. Guyana is rising from ruins and destruction and rising rapidly. Mr. Speaker, Skeldon Hospital. A theater is being constructed at Skeldon Hospital. The theater was supposed to be started in 2014. In 2015, the APNU AFC government stopped that work. Instead, now they have the rehab department in there. In 2021, we have budgeted for an operating theater for the Skeldon Hospital. So patients from the Upper Quarantine and from the Quarantine River, Orial and Sipruto, can get surgeries right in Skeldon. My Bikuri Hospital is being added services too. We will improve diagnostic capacity in that hospital, and within the next few years, a laboratory and X-ray will be set up there. Mr. Speaker, our government is going to fulfill, and it has already started to fulfill its manifesto promises. In my visits to the hinterland communities, Mr. Speaker, I have come to the conclusion that services offered to our people there are minimal. I was shocked to learn that quite a number of pregnant women went through their pregnancy without ever getting a blood test to determine even their blood count. Mr. Speaker, this is a travesty. His Excellency, after interacting with the communities across this country, has asked that all efforts be made to bring the healthcare services in the hinterland up to par. The PPP civic government in this term is determined to make major changes. The needs of our people in the hinterland must also be met. We must make more services available to our people living in the hinterland and riverine communities by building facilities, providing staff, providing transportation to staff and patients, and training more persons. All of this is being done in this year's budget, Mr. Speaker. I am happy to say to this House that the RHOs with hinterland responsibility have all welcomed the new direction of taking health care to the people. They are working to ensure that over the next few years, all pregnant mothers in the course of the pregnancy must be offered the opportunity to have their blood work done, be seen by a doctor at least once, have a dental check at least once, have at least one ultrasound to know her status with a VCP counselor, among other necessary and relevant tests. This has started, Mr. Speaker, and will continue to grow. For the first time, there is a rehab therapist attached to the Bartica Hospital in Region 7, Mr. Speaker. For the first time, there is a rehab therapist attached to the Mabruma Hospital in Region 1. And we have a therapist identified to go to Region 8. With that, we would have for the first time at least one therapist in every region.
Honorable member,
Mrs.
for the first time, I want to introduce something. 5 minutes before you come down, I will show you this. 2 minutes. Honorable member, you need to get an extension.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to ask for 5 minutes for my honorable colleague to conclude his statement.
Thank you very much, honorable member. Thank you very much, honorable member. You may continue to conclude.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in short, I'll just say, for Region 1, pre-August 2020, there were 11 doctors. We are proposing to have 30 doctors there before the end of the year, with at least 10 specialists. In Region 7, and to give them also ATV, and for the first time introducing in the hinterland regions, Mr. Speaker, ATV ambulances for the difficult terrain. 5 will be going to Region 1. 3 boat and engine, 1 ambulance. Mr. Speaker, Region 7 will be getting 33 doctors instead of 18 that they had. Region 8 will be getting 14 instead of 3. Region 9 will be getting 33 instead of 18. Mr. Speaker, rehab surgical capacity at Fort Kaichuma will be established. At Maruka, we'll be having a theater and surgeries being done there. Surgical capacity will also be installed at Aishalton. Mr. Speaker, I move on to Region 6. And I want to bring from my constituents a big thank you to President Ali and team for already starting to fulfill the election's promises of reopening the sugar estate and working to solve the problems of the industry as a whole. Mr. Speaker, reversing the increases in land rents and drainage and irrigation charges, promises already fulfilled, Mr. Speaker. One might be tempted to ask why there was no progress in Region 6 over the last year, 2015-2020. After all, the PVP had won Region 6, had a PPC elected chairman. The answer is simple, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker. The REO, who was the accounting officer, who decided and approved spending of the RDC budget and who headed the tender board, was appointed by APNO AFC. According to the regional chairman, quote, the REO from 2015 to July 2020 did not carry out the mandate, the decisions and requests of the RDC. As such, the RDC did not get to carry out its planned works, unquote. Instead, as the head of the tender board, which by 2017-2018 had no PVP-nominated representative, she supervised the sharing of contracts done in a questionable manner. The current RDC, through its REO, is asking for a thorough audit of the COVID monies that were spent. Mr. Speaker, over $76 million was spent with no accountability. In 2019, the same REO approved spending on school buses. It's ironical, Mr. Speaker, from 2017 to 2019, the region spent over $20 million on repairing 1 bus, PVV 1992. And this year, the region has budgeted to buy 2 buses, $18 million each. Mr. Speaker, the REO is cleaning the mess, leading the cleaning literally in the region. The NI system was totally broken. Mr. Speaker, they were awarding contractors canals to clean in Region 6. And these contractors bid for the canal, won the award, and they didn't know where the canal was located. Eventually they found, after 3 months, one of them found the canal and did a miserable job. Mr. Speaker, in Region 6, this year's budget, $293 million to bridges and roads. Education, $237 million, $159 million to repair buildings and $42 million on furniture. Health, $235 million on the maternity ward, infectious unit, Nyamsam Hospital and Skeldon Hospital. Mr. Speaker, in closing, the Honorable President Irfan Ali is a man with a vision and a man on a mission. His mission is to ensure as far as possible that maximum is achieved in the shortest possible time. He is leading a well-qualified and dedicated team. On this exciting journey, he does not have days off, and neither does any one of us working with him. There is much to achieve and little time in which to do it. 5 years were lost due to the destruction of gains by the APNO AFC coalition. His Excellency has spoken bravely of his and the PPC's plan for prosperity of Guyana. He continues to work to keep his pledge that he made during the election campaign, as documented in the manifesto. No one is to be
Honorable
left
Member, there's a standing order with respect to using the President's comments to influence the debate. However, what he said in the National Assembly could be used.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the President's views are challenging and shows his wide grasp of life. And to quote him in this National Assembly, quote, "As a nation, we will not be judged only by the way we treat human beings, but we must also pay particular attention to the environment, our natural heritage, and the way we treat animals. My government will support initiatives and invest in programs that addresses all these issues, sometimes referred to as soft issues, but which importantly adds to the story of who we are as Guyanese. Onward to a brighter future. This budget is plotting the path to recovery, economic dynamism, and resilience." Thank you, Mr. Speaker.